The Bagley-class destroyer USS Ralph Talbot was named in honor of the Marine Corps' first aviator to receive the Medal of Honor, Second Lieutenant Ralph Talbot. She is one of those ships that, if you study the Pacific War long enough, seems to appear everywhere. She was present at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, damaged during the Battle of Savo Island, screened carrier task forces during the battles of Midway and Leyte Gulf, and was struck by a kamikaze off Okinawa. Ralph Talbot carved a combat record as remarkable as it was relentless, and she earned 14 battle stars along the way. Her keel was laid down on October 28, 1935, at the Boston Navy Yard, and she was launched 1 year later in October of 1936. Overall, Ralph Talbot was 341 feet long, had a beam of 35 feet, and displaced over 2,200 tons when fully loaded. She was equipped with a main battery of 4 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns that were mounted individually along her center line. Her forward mounts were enclosed, while her aft mounts were open and protected by splinter shields, and she was equipped with 16 21-inch torpedo tubes, which were arranged in 4 quadruple mounts that were located amidships. Her anti-submarine weapons consisted of 2 depth-charge racks that were mounted on her stern, and at the time of her commissioning, her light anti-aircraft battery only featured 4 single-mounted 50 caliber machine guns. Ralph Talbot was powered by 4 oil-fired boilers which generated and fed steam to her 2 geared turbines, which turned her 2 propeller shafts. Rated for a little more than 47,000 shaft horsepower, she could cut through the sea at 37 knots and had a cruising range of just under 7,000 nautical miles at 12 knots. Her peacetime complement was 158 officers and enlisted men. By the end of the Pacific War, this had grown to over 250 officers and enlisted men. Ralph Talbot was commissioned into the United States Navy on October 14, 1937, with Lieutenant Commander Harry R. Thurber in command. After her shakedown cruise and availability period, she began her operational career by training and patrolling off the New England coast. On September 21, 1938, during the Great New England Hurricane, the heavy frigate USS Constitution, Old Ironsides herself, slammed into Ralph Talbot after breaking loose and drifting across Boston Harbor. Luckily, both ships escaped major damage. In 1939, she was transferred to the Pacific, and for the next several years, she patrolled between the West Coast and the Hawaiian Islands. After undergoing an overhaul at the Mare Island Navy Yard in early 1941, she shifted her home port to Pearl Harbor, where she operated from for the remainder of the year. On the morning of December 7th, Ralph Talbot was moored with her division mates of Des Ron 4 in the East Lock of Pearl Harbor, across from the battleship Utah and the light cruisers Raleigh and Detroit. Within minutes of the start of the Japanese attack, her guns were manned and fighting back, all while preparations for getting underway had begun. By 9 a.m., she was heading for open water and had splashed her first enemy aircraft of the war. By the day's end, her main battery had expended over 150 rounds, while her machine guns had accounted for over 1,500 rounds themselves. In the subsequent days after the attack, she searched the waters around Oahu for enemy submarines until being assigned on the 14th to Task Force 17, which was built around the aircraft carrier Saratoga. Task Force 17 left Pearl on the 15th with the intention of resupplying Wake Island. However, Wake fell on December 23rd, and the force was recalled back to Pearl Harbor. After spending late December and early January at Pearl, Ralph Talbot got underway on January 9th to patrol the South Pacific as part of Enterprise's screen. She participated in the February 1st strikes in the Marshalls, where she got to unleash her 5-inch batteries during several shore bombardments. Although these strikes caused only moderate damage, they were invaluable for the experience that was gained by everyone involved. She screened Enterprise during the February 24th strike on Wake Island and the March 4th strike on Marcus Island as well. Ralph Talbot returned to Pearl Harbor with Task Force 16 on March 9, 1942, where she was reassigned, and through May, she escorted convoys between Hawaii and the West Coast. In early June, she covered the fleet auxiliaries that refueled and replenished the victors of the Battle of Midway, before covering a convoy heading to Australia in preparation for the assault on Guadalcanal. Assigned to Task Group 62.6 for the invasion, she departed for the Solomon Islands on July 31st. Her initial job was to cover the transport group as it made its way to Guadalcanal, and after arriving on the morning of August 7th, she patrolled off the beachhead throughout the remainder of that day and the next. On the evening of the 8th, she was ordered to act as a radar picket north of Savo Island, along with her sister Blue. Their job was to act as a forward set of eyes for the invasion force. Earlier that afternoon, Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner, who was in overall tactical command of the amphibious force, had received reports that a Japanese surface force was on the move, but the reports were vague, and calculations put them as not being able to reach the vicinity of Savo Sound until mid-morning on the 9th at best. Around midnight, in a harbinger of things to come, lookouts on Ralph Talbot and on Blue reported unidentified planes flying over the vicinity of Savo Island. This was a scout plane from one of the approaching Japanese cruisers, but, as it was displaying its running lights, no action was taken as it was believed to be an Allied aircraft. At about 1:45 a.m., the destroyer Patterson, who was patrolling the southwestern entrance to the Sound, sent out a message warning of strange ships entering the Sound. Moments later, the Australian cruiser Canberra was struck by a barrage of Japanese shells. Moments later, USS Chicago, also a part of the Southern Cruiser Group, took a torpedo to her bow. As it turned out, although it was believed by Allied commanders that the two destroyers were more than capable of detecting an approaching enemy force, the SC radars they were equipped with were actually wholly inadequate to cover the areas that they were assigned to, and the Japanese battle line slipped right past them undetected. The only ship in the Sound that night that had a new SG surface search radar, which would have detected the approaching Japanese cruiser force, was the light cruiser USS San Juan, but she was protecting the eastern approach to the Sound, which was the least likely avenue of approach for a Japanese surface force. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, in what would become one of the darkest nights in the history of the United States Navy, the Japanese cruiser force mauled the unsuspecting Northern Cruiser Group. By a little after noon the next day, the heavy cruisers Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes, as well as Canberra, were on the bottom of the Sound, along with over 1,000 Allied sailors. After the Japanese column finished up with the U.S. cruisers, they wrapped around the north end of Savo Island and ran into Ralph Talbot. She charged in to meet the oncoming threat, with a notion of getting off a torpedo spread. However, before she could gain much headway, the Japanese destroyer Unagi beamed her searchlight at the American destroyer, revealing her position to Unagi's larger comrades. Just a few moments later, another searchlight caught Ralph Talbot in its ominous beam. This time, however, the light was accompanied by the splash of shells as the Japanese gunners worked to find her range. Up on the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Joseph Callahan thought for a moment that the shooting was blue on blue, as the colored dye with each splash and the direction they were coming from suggested the possibility of friendly fire. Callahan promptly ordered the destroyer's recognition lights flashed. For a moment the move seemed to work, until Ralph Talbot shuddered from a hit. The veteran Japanese cruiser Yubari, along with the light cruiser Tenryu and the heavier Furutaka, had crossed her stern and found the range. As the American destroyer swung about to fire a spread of torpedoes, shell after shell slammed into her. Her wardroom was struck, as well as her radar and fire control equipment. 3 more shells then slammed into her chart house, forward-starboard torpedo tubes, and her No. 4 5-inch gun. Ralph Talbot was able to let loose 4 torpedoes at Yubari during the exchange, but the light cruiser evaded all of them. She was saved from further abuse when she ducked into a rain squall. In all, 12 men had been killed, and another 23 had been wounded. As the Japanese steamed away, fire engulfed her bridge, her comms were out, and she had about a 20-degree list to starboard. Slowing to 1/3 speed, she turned toward Savo Island, where her crew continued their battle to save her. Within an hour, her fires and flooding were under control. Just after 7 a.m., communications were re-established, and by noon, enough emergency repairs had been made for her to get underway. Ralph Talbot arrived at the Mare Island Navy Yard on September 11, 1942. After her repair work and sea trials were completed in mid-November, she shifted to Hawaiian waters for refresher training before heading to Australia in late December. During the first half of 1943, she escorted convoys along the Australian coast. On May 13th, Ralph Talbot arrived at Noumea in New Caledonia to rejoin the fight in the Solomons. On June 30th, she covered the landings at Rendova and subsequently rescued 300 survivors from the attack transport Macaulay after she had been hit by an aerial torpedo while retiring from the landing beach. Late on the evening of July 4th, she bombarded Japanese shore installations at Rice Anchorage in preparation for an amphibious landing by 2 Army regiments at dawn on the 5th. Then, on the 9th and 11th, her 5-inch batteries supported the drive on Munda. On the afternoon of July 12th, Ralph Talbot got underway with Task Group 36 to conduct a sweep-up through New Georgia Sound. In the early hours of July 13th, U.S. radars detected a Japanese force off the northern tip of Kolombangara Island. The accompanying destroyers were split into 2 groups. Ralph Talbot's group stayed alongside the U.S. cruisers as the other group of destroyers made the initial torpedo run on the Japanese just after 1 a.m. At 1:12, the light cruisers opened up and smothered the lead ship of the Japanese formation, the light cruiser Jinsu. She sank quickly after being struck by the voluminous American shellfire and 2 torpedoes. As this was going on, Ralph Talbot and her group moved in and made their torpedo runs, but failed to achieve any hits. The Japanese formation then steamed off to the northwest as confusion broke out among the U.S. force. The Japanese did this in order to buy time to reload their long lances for another run, which they made around 2 a.m., just as the U.S. ships were maneuvering to open up on them again. In quick succession, the light cruisers St. Louis and Honolulu had their bows ripped open, while the destroyer Gwin was hit amidships. Ralph Talbot replied with a 4-torpedo salvo of her own, but once again failed to record a hit. Despite determined efforts to save her, Gwyn's survivors were evacuated by Ralph Talbot, and she was scuttled by torpedoes later that morning. Ralph Talbot continued to patrol and escort convoys throughout the Solomons until late October, when she was ordered to Brisbane, Australia. There, she joined up with Task Force 74, and on November 29th, participated in the bombardment of Japanese positions on New Britain. In mid-December, she covered the landings at Arawe and the assault on Cape Gloucester. After covering the landing at Sador on the northern coast of New Guinea during early January of 1944, she once again headed to the Mare Island Navy Yard for an overhaul. Ralph Talbot rejoined the fleet in mid-June and escorted convoys to and from the Mariana Islands as U.S. forces battled for control of the island group. Over the subsequent 2 months, she spent time on the gun line off Saipan and Guam, evacuated casualties, and escorted convoys. On August 26th, she joined the Fast Carrier Task Force at Eniwetok, and several days later sortied with it for strikes against the Bonin Islands, Yap, and the Palau Islands. After retiring to Manus for some much-needed rest and upkeep, she was underway again in early October, this time to participate in strikes on Okinawa, Formosa, and Luzon. On October 20th, her task group moved south to support the landings at Leyte. On the morning of October 24th, Ralph Talbot was steaming with Task Group 38.4 about 60 miles east of the island of Samar. Over the next 2 days, she screened her carriers as their air crews conducted strikes on the Japanese southern, center, and northern forces during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. On October 31st, her task group retired to the fleet anchorage at Ulithi. Ralph Talbot was reassigned to 7th Fleet on November 17th, and she patrolled the convoy lanes throughout the Leyte Gulf area until the 27th, when she departed for Crossroads. On December 12th, she returned to the Leyte Gulf area and subsequently escorted the 7th Fleet escort carriers during the Mindoro landings, which took place on the 15th. After spending Christmas at Marianas, Ralph Talbot got underway on January 1, 1945, for the invasion of Luzon. The word of the month for January 1945 for Ralph Talbot's crew was perseverance. Kamikazes were a constant threat from January 3rd on, and ships all around her were hit. Thankfully, she wasn't. On January 23rd, she retired to Ulithi for upkeep and was subsequently reassigned to 5th Fleet for the assault on Iwo Jima. Between February 16th and the 27th, she patrolled off Iwo and provided fire support before returning to Saipan. After spending most of March and April at Ulithi, Ralph Talbot got underway for Okinawa on April 20th. She arrived off Hagushi on the 26th, and it didn't take her long to get into the action, as just after 10 p.m. the next evening, she was closed on by 2 kamikazes. The first crashed into her aft starboard quarter, and the second was a near miss off her port quarter. Her damage control parties got the flooding under control within minutes, and she headed back to Karama Reto for repairs. She returned to the Hagushi anchorage on May 20th and resumed her patrol duties until shifting to Nakagusuku-wan 6 days later. After pulling carrier escort duty at the beginning of June, she shifted to Saipan, where she was assigned to convoy escort duty for the remainder of the war. In early August, she was rerouted and rescued 24 survivors of the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis, which had been sunk on her way to the Philippines. On September 1, 1945, Ralph Talbot escorted the heavy cruiser Portland from Guam to Truk Atoll, where the formal surrender of the island fortress was accepted on the 2nd during ceremonies aboard Portland. Ralph Talbot got underway for the United States on October 29th. In May of 1946, she was designated for use as a target in Operation Crossroads, the atomic bomb tests that were conducted at Bikini Atoll in July and August of that same year. She was highly contaminated during the tests and was subsequently towed to Kwajalein, where she was decommissioned on August 29, 1946. She was towed out to sea and scuttled on March 8, 1948. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe.